Hello and welcome to the small group edition of my book, If You Want to Walk on Water, You Gotta Get Out of the Boat. I'll be hosting the video segments you watch throughout the study. Each session will have a brief intro video to help set up the theme of the study. This will lead to some initial discussion questions found in your participants' guides under the heading Questions to Think About. You will then view a longer video segment, usually lasting 12 to 15 minutes, that will go deeper into that session's topic. Following this, you'll be directed back into your participants' guides for Bible study and further group discussion. Then to close our time together, I'll offer a final thought to end the session. During these 6 sessions, you will learn the skills essential to water walking: discerning God's call, transcending fear, risking faith, managing failure, and trusting God. And I'm especially glad that you're going to be doing this together with some other folks in a little community. A lot of times, even when people are attending church, they lack that place where they can talk about, where am I struggling? Where do I need help? Where am I facing temptations? And I hope you do that for each other. I trust that this study is going to be a blessing to your small group. And my hope is that you, like Peter, will accept God's invitation to go for a walk on the water. The Bible is, among other things, the story of some very important walks. There's Adam and Eve walking with God in the cool of the day in the garden. Moses leading the Israelites into the roundabout way of the wilderness. There's the walk Joshua and the Israelites took around the walls of Jericho. There was the walk of the disciples on the road to Emmaus, or Paul on the road to Damascus. But I think maybe the most intriguing walk in all the Bible is the walk that Peter took on the Sea of Galilee, on the water. It's intriguing because it involves so many of the aspects of following Christ. Having the wisdom to discern when Jesus is present and how He's calling. Having the courage to get out of the boat. The euphoria of walking on the water and the fear and panic of failing and sinking. The sense of relief that Jesus is strong enough to save. And the wonder and adoration that Peter ends up worshiping Jesus with. I think this story is especially intriguing because, in a way, it's Jesus' invitation to all of us. Jesus is still looking for followers who are willing to get out of the boat and come to Him on the water. So, if you're up for the challenge, let's go take a walk. I want to tell you a story. Some years ago, back when I lived in California, my wife got for me what I thought was a pretty creative birthday present. It was a ride in a hot air balloon. We went to the valley where these things went up, the Conejo Valley, Southern California, met the one other couple that was going to go on this balloon ride with us, and then we got into the balloon and began our ascent. It was scenic, it was majestic. You could look out on the Pacific Ocean and the Conejo Valley. But I experienced one other emotion I hadn't really anticipated. Anybody want to guess? It was fear. I always pictured these balloon baskets going about chest high. This only went up a little above your knees. So one good lurch and you'd be out of there. I was not liking this at all. I looked over at my wife. She was even more scared than I was. I could tell because Nancy was standing like this. And I said, Nancy, look behind you. There's a horse ranch. It's beautiful. And she went, oh yeah, beautiful. Now about this time, I decided I'd like to get to know a little more about the guy who's flying the balloon. Because I could try to psych myself up into thinking that everything's going to be okay. I could try to have a positive attitude. But the truth was, we had placed our lives in this guy's hands. Everything depended on his character and competence. So I inched over to him and asked him how he got started flying hot air balloons in the first place and what he did for a living. I was hoping he had a real responsible job, like neurosurgeon or something. And I knew we were in trouble when his response to me began, well, it's like this, dude, he said. This was Southern California. He said he didn't actually have a job. Mostly he surfed. And he said he started flying hot air balloons because one time he was driving his pickup truck and he'd had too much to drink and got in an accident. You know how that goes, he said to me. And he said, if this one acts a little funny on the way down, it's because I've never flown it before and I'm not quite sure how to handle it in the descent. Now at this point, the wife of the other couple looked and said the only words either of them would speak the whole trip. She looked at me and said, you're a pastor, do something religious. So I took an offering. Now, here's the deal. Every day, people wake up in this giant balloon circling the sun and try to convince themselves that things will be okay if they can just develop a positive mental attitude. But the real question is there somebody piloting this thing? And are his character and his competence such that I can, with confidence, put my life in his hands? And that brings us to this wonderful story of fear and faith about Jesus and his friends. Jesus comes to his disciples. They've been on a boat. He put them on it. They've been in the water. You got to imagine how bad the storm is, because when they got into the boat, into the water, it was still light. By the time Jesus comes back to them, it's the fourth watch of the night, sometime after 3 in the morning. Those are the conditions under which Jesus is going to have Peter get out of the boat. And Peter gets out, but he sinks. And the question is, did Peter fail? Well, before we get into that, I want to just level the playing field here for a moment. I want to do a mass confession of failure. So if you have ever failed in your life, if you ever said the wrong thing, if you ever wore the wrong clothes, if, Roger, you were ever turned down for a date in your life, if you ever experienced social, relational, financial, vocational, spiritual failure of any kind, raise your hand. How many of you never failed personally, but the person next to you looks like they went south a couple times? Yeah, I thought so, Marcia. Out on the water, there's a storm. It's dark and it's windy and there's problems. And if you get out of the boat, whatever your boat is, there's a real good possibility you might sink, you might have problems, you might fail. But if you don't get out of the boat, you will never ever walk on the water, that's for sure. And I think in this story, Matthew has really crafted a picture of what does it look like to be a disciple of Jesus. Walking on the water is a kind of picture of doing something together as God gives me the power to do it that I could never do on my own. But part of what that means is that following Jesus is always going to be a choice between the comfort and security and safety of the boat and the risk of getting out. And I wanted to create kind of a picture for us of that. And Doug, I think you can do this. Would you mind coming on over here? We actually have a boat with a chair that I think will be really, really well suited for this. So would you get in? And Doug, your job is to make yourself as comfortable as humanly possible. I want you to take a good look at Doug. He's illustrating something that's real profound about life. All of us who follow Christ have a choice to make, and generally it involves comfort or growth. Now, this is often difficult news for us because we're into comfort. Anybody want to guess what's the name of the #1 best-selling chair in America? Lazy Boy. It's not Risky Boy. It's not Worker Boy. We have all kinds of language around this. We say that we just want to go home and veg, make ourselves as much like vegetation as humanly possible. And we say, for people who do that in front of a television, we call them couch potatoes in their lazy boys. Well, if you want to think of it this way, the other disciples who stayed in the boat, they were kind of boat potatoes. They wanted to be around Jesus, but they didn't really want to take the risk of following him all the way out of the boat. Now, if somebody's in a chair like that in their home, what's the one object they most need in their hands?
Remote control.
Remote control. So, Doug, there's your remote. Now, this is a man devoted to comfort. Let me ask you a question. Does it look like he is poised for an explosion of development and growth? Comfort, which sounds so inviting, turns out to be maybe the most dangerous thing of all. The boat ends up being not quite as safe as we think it is. In fact, on these Great Lakes, one of the biggest boats that was built, the Edmund Fitzgerald, remember that? Went down a few decades ago. Boat's not all that safe. So, Doug, because we're concerned for you, you better get out of the boat. All right, if y'all want to come on back and have a seat, I'll say a few more words about this boat business. There's a lot of good reasons to get out of the boat. For one thing, that's the only way you grow. We need challenges and risks if we're ever going to learn. For another thing, when people don't, when you give in to comfort, your life gets quite stagnant. Not much is going on. But I'll tell you the biggest single reason why somebody ought to get out of the boat. In this story, where was Jesus? He was out on the water. On the water is where Jesus is. It's only when you're willing to take the risk of obeying God and saying yes and getting out of the boat that you meet Jesus. Because he's there anytime somebody takes a step of faith. Peter does that in this story. He gets out of the boat, and for a while, it's like there's only Peter and Jesus in the whole world. It's like master, like disciple, and he's walking on the water. And then he does what a lot of us do. He takes his eyes off of Jesus. He notices the wind. He sees there's a storm and the waves are high and the night is dark, and he says to himself, "What was I thinking?" And he sinks. Failure is not nearly so much an event. It's not what happens to you. It's a way we think about an event. Jonas Salk, the guy who developed the vaccine for polio, came up with 200 unsuccessful vaccines. Somebody asked him once, how did it feel to fail 200 times? Salk said, I didn't fail 200 times. I just discovered 200 ways how not to vaccinate against polio. Now, let me ask you, Jonas Salk came up with 200 unsuccessful ways to vaccinate against polio. Was Jonas Salk a failure? I don't think so. I live in Chicago, Illinois. I've loved the Chicago Cubs my whole life long. Cubs have not been in a World Series since 1945. They have not won a World Series since 1909, over 90 years. Are the Chicago Cubs a failure? No. Yeah, not too sure on that one. Okay. Did Peter fail? Well, in a sense he did. His faith was not strong enough. He took his eyes off Jesus. He sank. But I'll tell you what I think. I think there were 11 bigger failures sitting in the boat. It's very interesting. Nobody ever criticizes their failure. Their failure goes unnoticed, unobserved, uncritiqued. Only Peter knew the embarrassment and humiliation of public failure. But I'll tell you two other things that only Peter knew. Only Peter knew the glory of what it is to walk on the water. And I don't think he ever forgot that. I think once you ever walk on the water, once you experience God's power in your life, it marks you till the day you die. And another thing, only Peter knew to the marrow of his bones that when he failed, when he fell, that right arm of Jesus was strong enough to reach down and pick him up and save him and rescue him. What matters is what happens when somebody gets out of the boat. Great words written about what happens when human beings get in the game by Theodore Roosevelt. And Adam, I'm going to ask if you would read these words for us, because I'd love for everybody to hear them.
It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, who at best knows in the end the triumph of great achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. so that his place will never be with those cold, timid souls who know neither victory or defeat.
Thanks, Adam. Sometimes we will fail, every one of us. I hope we fail when we dare greatly. Sometimes we will know the exhilaration of what it is to walk on the water. The reason I love this story so much more than anything else is because Jesus is still looking for somebody who loves him enough and trusts him enough to leave what is safe and what is comfortable. But this one thing is true: if you want to walk on the water, you got to get out of the boat. I hope you've learned a few basics about water walking during our time together and have been encouraged to think about your choices, your boats, and the opportunity to water walk. It's easy to seek comfort and create boats, isn't it? And that's why so many people choose that path. But God is calling you, as He calls every believer, to put your faith in Him and start getting out of your boat a little more each day. The personal journey sections in your participants' guides have questions you can reflect on either now or later at home. And I would encourage you to set aside some quiet time to think about these questions. There are no right or wrong answers, and nobody needs to know your responses unless you choose to discuss them with someone. What's important is that you take time to reflect on some issues you explored today, issues that may cause you to be uncomfortable or even a bit angry at yourself or God or somebody else. By their nature, some boats people create are pretty ugly and secretive. Remember, though, that God loves you just the way you are. He is ready whenever you're willing to get out of the boat to help you do things you could never accomplish on your own. One of the first steps in the process of water walking is assessing honestly where you are right now and where you want to be.